It's a problem. We're on the lookout constantly. There seem to be more and more of them. We've got to be fairly good at recognizing the more common ones, but every few months another one turns up. Now, back to the theme of spiritualism. This is Pixie. I'll try to read the caption for you off of my screen. The spirit of Pinky, not Pixie, Pinky. The spirit of Pinky, an Aztec princess who lived in Mexico 500 years ago, who was one of the chief factors in the management of our national affairs during most of the time of the Lincoln misrule. Lincoln's opponents were using this whole spiritualism thing against him, to the preposterous idea that fairies from Mexico were actually in charge in Washington. Here's another female at the upper left and involved with politics. You are probably aware that women could not vote directly in Lincoln's day, and yet women had interests, which means they had opinions, which means they had influence. And this badly designed piece of political propaganda uses that. It reads, "A Union lady taking a look at the modest general." That's General McClellan on the right. Down in the middle you see some soldiers loading a cannon, and it says compromise. At the bottom there is a slave overseer whipping a slave, and it says a military necessity. I show this to school groups and ask them if they can tell me whether this is for McClellan or against McClellan. And I had to look at it for about 20 minutes when I first found it to figure out that it is, in fact, against McClellan. Because a Union lady there, holding the general's field glasses as if she's standing on a field of war, taking a look at a modest general. Now, this is a turn of phrase on the stock phrases of the time. It would normally be a modest lady looking at a Union general. And McClellan is being accused of trying to have it both ways, that he wants to prosecute the war as he's running for office against Lincoln in 1864, and yet he wants to call an immediate ceasefire and return slaves to the South and let the southern states go. He is arguing at the same time for war and for peace. And this proved to be a fairly effective campaign against him by the Republicans. Although it was not an easy win for Lincoln. 55-45 was the percentage of the vote that year. And that's just in the North. 45% of the populace in the North wanted McClellan to win and end the war right away. This is a wonderful item. It's not exactly a children's game. It's more of a family entertainment piece. It is called a Opticon, and it is a series of it's about 5 feet long of scroll work, hand-colored, depicting various scenes of the Civil War running from 1861 through 1864. It does not end with Lincoln's assassination. And this will be on display in a couple of forms in the show The Team of Rivals that opens here at the museum in October. What we see here, the second scene, the large scene, is the firing on Fort Sumter. These men in the front have arms, have cannon, and out here is the fort burning. The next scene here is Elmer Ellsworth, the young colonel who had been reading law in the Lincoln and Herndon Law Office here in Springfield before the war started, and proved to be a very able young man in recruiting soldiers for the war. When there was a flag flying from the top of a hotel in Alexandria, Virginia, visible from most parts of Washington, D.C., Ellsworth went across the river into the hotel, climbed up to the rooftop, and tore it down. And as he was coming down the stairs in that hotel, the hotel owner came out of the door and shot him in the back and killed him. This was the first personal grievance that the Lincolns had to undergo. They had been very close to Elmer Ellsworth. He was like a second son to them. He was the first officer killed in the war, and isn't it fitting, the Southerners thought, that the first officer killed should be nearly Lincoln's son. Here is a .58 caliber Springfield, Massachusetts rifle made in 1863 for use by the Union Army. We do not have any actual weapons on display in this museum. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's a decision that was made when the museum opened, and it may change in the future, but we do have a few items in the collection that apply, and the interesting part of it is that these were things given to the state mostly decades ago by the children or the grandchildren of the soldiers themselves. We know very little about them, but we now have on staff, as of the last year or so, someone who knows a good deal about old armaments and is able to examine them and trace their origins. This conceivably came with that rifle. 1863, belonged to a Massachusetts regiment that is an officer. It's an officer's sword. It's not a cavalry sword. And what you can see up close here, I think near the handle over there on the right, are the manufacturer's marks. Now, we recently learned that there are all kinds of swords out there, supposedly from the Civil War, that are not. They were made during the war and after the war, sold as dress swords for people who may or may not have been soldiers, but especially after the war. Every town having a parade, and for years and years afterwards, people wanted to look like they had been in the war, or perhaps carry a weapon for a loved one who had been killed in the war and could not march that day. I'm going to try to go back here. Nope. Go back to, hold on. The dress swords don't have nearly as much curve as a real one would. And I'm not a physicist and I'm not a cavalry officer, so I can't tell you exactly why that is. But it's pretty clear they're easier and cheaper to make without this much of an angle to them.